The past is gone. The future hasn't happened yet. And the present is this tiny little moment, right now, that keeps slipping through our fingers. That feels so true that it almost feels silly to even say it out loud. It's like saying water is wet or fire is hot. You don't argue with it. You live inside it. You remember yesterday. You plan for tomorrow. And you feel like you're standing on a thin, moving platform called now, watching everything slide past you. That's the story. And it works beautifully for daily life. It works for catching buses, making appointments, celebrating birthdays, and regretting things you said 10 years ago. But here's something I've learned the hard way. The ideas that feel the most obvious are often the ones doing the most damage. Not because they're evil, but because we stop looking at them. Time is one of those ideas. We grow up swimming in it. We never step outside it, so we assume we understand it. And that's usually where the trouble begins. Now let's talk about the most fragile idea in the whole story of time. The present. People talk about it like it's sacred. Live in the moment, they say. Be here now. As if the present were a tiny, glowing platform, and if you're not standing perfectly on it, you'll fall off into regret or anxiety. We imagine the present as a thin edge, almost like the blade of a knife, cutting reality into two parts. On one side is the past, fixed, frozen, untouchable. On the other side is the future, open, uncertain, full of possibilities. And right on that edge, balancing carefully, is you. That picture feels so convincing that we rarely question it, but the moment you slow down and look closely, it starts to wobble. Here's a simple question that sounds silly until you really try to answer it. How long is the present? Is it 1 second long? If so, which second? The one that just ended, or the one that's about to end? By the time you decide, it's already slipped away. Is the present a fraction of a second? A blink? A heartbeat? Even then, that heartbeat has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Which part counts as now? The present keeps shrinking the moment you try to pin it down. You reach for it, and it dissolves in your hands like smoke. And yet, and this is the strange part, you are never outside it. You've never once been in the past. You've never once been in the future. Every memory you've ever had, every plan you've ever made, every worry and every hope has happened in what you call now. So how can something that never leaves you be so hard to locate? This is where our intuition quietly betrays us. We imagine the present as something moving, sliding forward, dragging us along behind it. But nothing in your direct experience actually shows you that motion. You don't feel a click when one moment ends and the next begins. There's no seam, no tick you can point to and say, there. That's where the present changed. What you feel instead is continuity, like listening to music. You don't hear individual notes popping in and out of existence. You hear a melody. The notes blur together just enough to feel smooth. The present works the same way. It feels solid, not because it's a single instant, but because your mind stitches moments together into something usable. Without that stitching, life would feel chaotic. You couldn't catch a ball. You couldn't follow a sentence. You couldn't even recognize your own thoughts. So the present isn't a razor-thin edge after all. It's more like a soft window, wide enough for experience to make sense, narrow enough to feel immediate. And here's the unsettling thought. If the present isn't a single precise point, if it has thickness, blur, and overlap, then maybe the sharp dividing line we imagine between past, present, and future isn't as sharp as we think. Maybe it's not a knife edge at all. Maybe it's something we invented because our minds needed it to survive. And once you see that, the idea of time starts to loosen its grip, just a little. Now here's where time really starts to play tricks on us, not out in the universe, but right inside our own heads. Most people will tell you they experience the past and the future all the time. They'll say, I keep thinking about what happened, or I can't stop worrying about what's coming. But look closely, and something strange appears. You never actually visit the past, and you never actually step into the future. What you interact with instead are pictures, stories, and feelings that are happening right now. When you remember childhood, you don't open a door and walk backward into a previous year. You sit where you are, and your mind rebuilds a scene. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but well enough to feel real. Faces blur, details shift, emotions grow louder or softer than they were at the time. That's not time travel, that's reconstruction. Every memory is made in the present, and every time you remember the same event, you change it a little. That's why two people can remember the same moment differently. That's why memories feel more certain the more wrong they get. Now think about the future. When you imagine tomorrow, or next year, or 10 years from now, you're not peeking ahead, you're guessing. You're assembling fragments from the past and projecting them forward. You borrow old patterns and dress them up as predictions. The future you worry about is built from yesterday's fears. The future you hope for is built from yesterday's desires. Both of them feel vivid, urgent, and emotionally charged, and because they feel strong, we assume they're real in the same way the present is. But they're not. They're mental simulations. And here's the important part. These simulations create the sensation that time is moving. Think about waiting for something important, a message, a result, a person to arrive. Time seems to slow down. Every minute stretches. You check the clock again and again, as if staring might push time forward. Now compare that to being completely absorbed in something you love. Hours disappear. You look up and think, already? Time didn't change its behavior in either case. You did. Your attention, your emotions, your expectations, they bent your experience of time without touching time itself. So when people say time is flying or time is dragging, what they're really describing is their relationship to change. Time isn't speeding up or slowing down. Your mind is tightening or loosening its grip. And once you notice this, something clicks. If your sense of time can stretch, shrink, blur, or snap depending on what you're feeling, then maybe the feeling of time flowing isn't proof that it's actually flowing. It might be a side effect, an emotional echo, a byproduct of how your brain organizes experience so you can survive, remember, and plan. The past feels solid because it left traces in you. The future feels open because it hasn't. And the present feels like it's moving because your mind is constantly updating its story about what just happened and what might happen next. So the feeling of time passing isn't a clock ticking in the universe. It's a story being told, moment by moment, inside you. And that realization quietly changes everything. Now, let's play a little game, a mental puzzle. Don't worry, there's no math, no equations, no complicated gadgets. Just a simple thought experiment, and it will start to show cracks in the story you've been told about past, present, and future. Imagine two people, far apart from each other. Let's call them Alice and Bob. Both of them are looking at their clocks and saying, "This is happening right now." Sounds normal, right? Seems obvious. The present is one, universal, shared thing. Surely Alice and Bob must be talking about the same moment. But here's the problem, how could they ever really check? Messages travel at a finite speed. Light takes time to move from one place to another. Even if Alice shouts, "Hey Bob, it's now," he doesn't hear it immediately. By the time he gets the message, his now has already moved forward. In other words, Alice's now and Bob's now don't line up perfectly. It's subtle but important. You might feel, oh, that's just a delay. Of course, they're in the same present, but think about it. If you were standing next to someone on a distant planet, light from your actions would take years to reach them. Their now would be completely different from yours. There's no universal now that everyone in the universe can agree on. And yet, you live inside your now as if it were the only one that matters. You feel it flowing, pressing against you, moving relentlessly forward. But that flow is a local experience, anchored to you. For Alice, the present slices the universe one way. For Bob, it slices it another. Both are valid, both real, and yet neither matches the other. Here's where it starts to feel unsettling. If the present is relative, if it depends on where you are and how fast you're moving, then the line we draw between past, present, and future is not as solid as we thought. What we call past in one place might still be future somewhere else. And that means the neat picture of time marching in a single line begins to crumble. But it gets even stranger. Imagine you're watching a spaceship traveling away from you at almost the speed of light. You might think it's just moving, no big deal. But because of how light and signals travel, that person's clock, her experience of now, doesn't match yours at all. Her present stretches and warps relative to yours. Your present isn't universal. It isn't a slice across the universe. It's a patch, a local event in a vast unfolding tapestry. And here's the kicker: you never leave your present. You can try to remember the past, imagine the future, or even leap forward by moving fast, but your experience is always anchored in where and when you are. Your now is inescapable, but it's not the same now for everyone else. That simple thought, that your present is relative, not absolute, begins to dismantle everything we take for granted about time. The past isn't entirely behind you. The future isn't entirely ahead. And the present, that knife-edge moment you cling to, might not even exist the way you imagine. Suddenly, the universe feels less like a clock and more like a pattern, a network of events connected in ways you can't fully line up. And that's exactly where the real mystery begins. Now let's go deeper into something that most people find uncomfortable, even a little scary. The present, that tiny, sharp moment we've been clinging to. The now that feels like it slices reality into past and future. What if it doesn't exist the way we think it does? Think about it. Every single thing you've ever experienced, the warmth of the sun, the taste of coffee, the sound of someone laughing, happens right now inside your head. Your brain stitches it together into a continuous narrative. That stitching is so smooth and compelling that it feels like the present is flowing, moving forward, ticking along like a metronome. But here's the catch. There is no universal metronome, no cosmic clock keeping track for everyone at once, no magical now floating above the earth, pointing at the present moment. The universe never labels a slice of time as special. The present is invisible to everything except you. Imagine a loaf of bread. You want a slice. You can cut straight down, and that's your slice. Tilt the knife, cut at an angle, and you get a completely different slice. Neither slice is more real than the other. They're just different perspectives on the same loaf. The universe works the same way. Time is one dimension of the bread. Your now is just the slice you happen to be cutting through it. Someone else, somewhere else, will have a different slice, equally valid. And that's what's so unsettling. We cling to the idea that there's a single present because it feels intuitive. We feel ourselves moving along a timeline, like a train on tracks. But in reality, each observer, each conscious being, experiences their own now, determined by where they are, how fast they're moving, and how their brain processes events. There is no universal this moment floating above the planet or the galaxy. That doesn't mean the present isn't real. You feel it, you exist in it, but it's a local phenomenon, not a universal property of reality. Your present is real for you, just as my present is real for me, but they may never line up exactly. That's why we can remember the past and imagine the future so vividly, yet never step outside the flow of our own experience. Once you accept this, the entire way we think about time starts to shift. The past isn't gone, the future isn't missing, and the present isn't a razor-thin edge moving through the universe. It's more like a spotlight that your mind shines on the events you experience, and the universe itself doesn't care about the boundaries you draw. This realization is slightly uncomfortable. It challenges the sense that the world has a single, absolute order that we can step into. It makes us feel smaller, not in a trivial way, but in a humbling way. The universe isn't constructed around our perspective. Time doesn't exist for our convenience. And yet, in that honesty, there's also freedom. Because if the present is not fixed, if it's not a single slice of reality that everyone shares, then every moment you experience becomes uniquely yours. Your memories, your thoughts, your interactions, they are what anchor you in time. You don't need to chase the present. You are already inside it, shaping it with every breath, every action, every thought. And once you start seeing it this way, you begin to sense something profound. Maybe the past and future aren't as separate as we think. Maybe they overlap, interweave, and echo in ways we can only begin to notice. And that's the doorway to the paradox we're about to explore, the one that makes past and future start to collapse into each other. Now let's think about something that most of us take for granted, the idea that the past is gone, that it has disappeared into some invisible void, never to be touched again, and the idea that the future hasn't happened yet, waiting like an empty stage for events to unfold. At first glance, this seems obvious. Yesterday is gone. Tomorrow hasn't arrived. We mark our lives with calendars, clocks, and journals, constantly reminding ourselves that time moves in a single direction. But what if that assumption, so ingrained and unquestioned, is misleading? Here's a simple thought. Events don't vanish. They don't evaporate or flicker out of existence. Everything that happened is still embedded in the world, woven into the chain of cause and effect. The reason we can remember, record, or reconstruct the past is because it left traces. Photographs, scars, footprints, the taste of old coffee, songs we can sing from memory, all of these are evidence that what happened is still there in some sense, even if we can't step into it directly. Think about a song. Once it's played, the notes don't disappear. You can hum them later, play the same melody again, or teach it to someone else. The song persists in the world and in memory. The past works the same way. It's like a melody layered across reality. No note truly vanishes. And the future? The same applies, but in reverse. The future isn't missing. It's simply undefined. We don't know the specific arrangement of events yet, but that doesn't mean it's absent. The universe has patterns, tendencies, and structures that allow certain outcomes to arise naturally. When you plan for tomorrow, you are interacting with the future, not by reaching into it, but by nudging the present in ways that will shape what comes next. The future is latent, potential, unfolding from the present like a tree growing from a seed. Here's the strange consequence of this perspective. The past isn't behind us in some mystical sense. The future isn't ahead of us in some unreachable void. Instead, past, present, and future are interconnected layers of the same evolving pattern. What you call the past exists as evidence, trace, or structure that constrains and informs the present. What you call the future exists as possibilities, potentials, and influences that the present interacts with. The present isn't a knife edge slicing through reality. It's the intersection where all these layers meet, where experience takes shape. And here's the key insight. Nothing about this view destroys the uniqueness of experience. You can still regret what happened. You can still anticipate what is to come. But you stop imagining the past as irretrievably gone and the future as a distant land. Instead, both are intimately present in the ways your mind, body, and environment are interacting right now. This shift in perspective quietly changes how you feel about time. Regret softens because the past isn't a vanished territory, it's part of the structure that created who you are now. Anxiety about the future diminishes because it isn't a blank page, it's a set of branching possibilities emerging from the patterns already present. The universe becomes less like a treadmill you are running on and more like a story you are living in, moment by moment. And that's exactly the point where the first cracks in our everyday story of time appear. The past isn't a prison, the future isn't a promise yet to be fulfilled, and the present isn't a fleeting knife edge. They're all part of a single, continuous pattern, one that we're experiencing from the middle without ever leaving. Now that we've started to see the past and future differently, past as something that isn't gone, future as something that isn't missing, let's think about what this actually means for our daily lives. How does it change the way we feel, the way we act, the way we suffer or rejoice. Let's start with regret. Most of us carry it like a backpack full of stones. We look back at mistakes and wish we could undo them. We replay conversations, cringe at things we said, dwell on opportunities we missed. And naturally, this makes the past feel heavy, permanent, cruel. But here's the surprising twist. When you realize the past isn't really gone, regret starts to change. The past doesn't haunt you, it informs you. Every mistake, every embarrassing moment, every success, all of it is part of the structure that made you who you are today. That memory of tripping in front of your classmates, it's not a lost moment. It's a trace, a clue, a tiny ripple that shaped how you learned, how you acted, and how you grew. The past isn't some empty void that can only punish you. It's the foundation beneath your feet. Understanding that softens the sharp edge of regret. Now consider waiting. Waiting for a message, a result, or some life-changing event. When you're stuck in anticipation, time seems to slow. Every second stretches painfully. You glance at the clock over and over, trying to nudge the future along. But the truth is, the future isn't sitting somewhere far away. It's already present in the form of potential. Your actions, your choices, your words are shaping it moment by moment. Waiting isn't about enduring an empty stretch of time. It's about participating in the process that unfolds into what comes next. That perspective makes waiting less like torture and more like tending a garden. You can't make the plants grow faster, but you can water them, nurture them, and influence how they flourish. And what about fear? Fear of loss, failure, or the unknown. Fear thrives when we think of the future as a distant, uncontrollable land filled with invisible monsters. But once you see the future as emerging from the present, not separate from it, fear loses some of its teeth. You're no longer powerless. You can't dictate everything, of course, but you can act, decide, and respond in ways that influence the unfolding pattern. Fear becomes a guide, a signal, rather than a tyrant dragging you along. Even joy changes. When you stop chasing the present as a fleeting instant, moments of happiness aren't gone the second they occur. They leave traces in you, echo in your memory, shape your understanding, and influence the next moments. Happiness persists, not forever perhaps, but long enough to matter. In short, rethinking time shifts the way you inhabit your life. You stop imagining yourself as a passenger hurtling helplessly along a line from past to future. Instead, you become part of the very fabric of experience. Regret doesn't vanish, but it becomes a teacher. Waiting doesn't vanish, but it becomes participatory. Fear doesn't vanish, but it becomes a signal. And all of this quietly prepares you for the next realization, the paradox at the heart of time. When you see the past and future not as separate, but overlapping, and the present as local and relational, the distinction between what has happened and what will happen begins to blur. The neat compartments of yesterday, today, and tomorrow start to collapse. And that collapse is where things get fascinating. Not scary, not magical, but strangely liberating. It's a perspective that doesn't just change how you think, it changes how you live. So where does all this leave us? Not with answers, not with a secret trick to bend time, but with a quiet kind of clarity. You are not racing along a track called time. You are not a passenger watching moments slip past. You are a process, woven into the flow of events, shaping and being shaped by what happens around you. Every memory, every choice, every small action is part of the pattern. Every laugh, every tear, every cup of coffee contributes to the unfolding melody of your life. Time doesn't need to be escaped, defeated, or conquered. It doesn't care about your wishes, your fears, or your plans. But it does offer something better, perspective. The past leaves traces. The future emerges from possibilities. The present is where it all intersects, not a razor-thin moment, but a soft window where experience happens. And in that window, you are alive. You are learning, noticing, and participating in the universe, not as a separate traveler, but as a part of the story itself. Time, once taken for granted, now feels different. Not frightening, not urgent, just real, just yours. You can't unsee it, and you wouldn't want to.